All right. We have a fabulous speaker tonight. Please welcome Rachel Seets, a Fort Worth native and passionate prairie advocate with a master's in biology and experience supporting landowners through the Hill Country Alliance. She now serves as North Texas Conservation Manager for the Native Prairie Association of Texas, helping protect the wild landscapes that make Texas feel like home.
Thank you. Hi. Hey. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Vicki. Like she said, my name is Rachel Seets. I'm the North Texas Conservation Manager for Native Prairies Association of Texas. Has anybody here heard of us? A few. Okay, I'll take it. Well, I wanted to take a second and just give you guys some major kudos. It is a delight to be here and to feel the energy in this room. I was part of the Hays County Master Naturalist down in the Hill Country for a couple years. And it's just really nice to see how many people are here today. It's really is lovely to be here. So again, thank y'all so much. Well, y'all saw the title, Vanishing Grasslands. I'll be doom and gloom for just a little bit, but I'm going to be focusing mostly on hope and a story of progress here in the state. So for my presentation, I'll be talking a little bit about my organization. I'll talk about prairies and prairies in Texas. And then I'll get a little bit broader, talk about the story of land conservation in Texas, what's going on in the state of Texas as far as land preservation. And then kind of dive back into NPAT and what we're doing here. What kind of agreements are we working on to help preserve land? Got it. So a few of y'all have already heard of Native Prairies Association of Texas. I'll refer to us as NPAT moving forward. But we started almost 40 years ago, so next year will be our 40th anniversary. And like many of y'all, it was a group back in the 80s that was becoming more and more concerned with how rapidly our prairies were disappearing in the state. And so they got together and formed this nonprofit land trust that was statewide with the mission of protecting prairies, preserving prairies, and doing that through stewardship and community. So that was a group of volunteers in the 80s. We've since grown to like 8 full-time paid staff. So we're still pretty lean and mean, but it's amazing how much we've grown over these 40 years. Like I said, we are a land trust, and so we work through various agreements that I'll get into later to preserve land. So one of those approaches is simple outright land ownership. So we've acquired 11 properties. And the second type of land conservation that we primarily work in is conservation easements, which I could talk for hours about those. They're litigious and boring, so I only have 4 slides dedicated to that today. So y'all are being spared that. But we work with private landowners to protect their property through an agreement called a conservation easement. So we hold 22 conservation easements in partnership with private landowners. So combined, that's about 7,000 acres of native prairie that's protected forever. And actually, over 1,100 acres of that have been protected in the last year and a half. So that's something that we're really, really excited about. It's a lot of progress to have been made over the past 2 years. So on top of being a land trust, we're also a membership organization. It sounds like you guys are all super involved already with the Blackland chapter, but should you have any interest and want to dive into prairies specifically and community work around prairies, which again, it sounds like y'all are already pretty entrenched in some great prairie work here in the Blackland chapter. But if you want to get involved with yet another group, I highly recommend checking us out online. These are our chapter regions. We've got 5 chapters across the state. So y'all would be the Blackland chapter. Some of y'all might be further west out in the Fort Worth chapter. But we just formed our Northeast chapter. There are some beautiful prairie properties out there and some even more remarkable landowners, and they have formed this new chapter. So highly encourage getting involved or checking out some of the events. You don't even have to become a member if you want to just come and visit for one of our events. We have educational programs. We do a lot of site visits, a lot of bird outings, field work, anything prairie related. So I said we are a land trust. We are specifically focused on prairie preservation. So we protect all types of native prairies of Texas, and that is a lot. There's a huge variety of grasslands here, from your moist, your wetlands down on the Gulf. You go out further west, you have extremely dry grasslands out there. And then we have our Blackland Prairie, which I know y'all are all familiar with. It's amazing prairie land up in central Texas down to Austin. So we work with a variety of different prairie lands. And this is, I'm sure, a picture y'all have seen about 1,000,000 times, different ecoregions. We have grasslands in every one of our ecoregions. Even in the piney woods, they're interspersed with some truly rare and gorgeous remnant prairies. But of note and most relevant to this location is our Blackland Prairie. So we have that bright green strip that goes all the way from North Texas down to Austin, traveling down I-35 essentially. And this is jam-packed with some of the most healthy and rich soil in the world. And at this point, it's become pretty rare. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So the prairies I'm mentioning are part of a larger prairie system that stretches all the way from central Texas, north through central US, all the way up to Canada. And historically, it comprised of about 170 million acres of tallgrass prairie and 265 million acres of shortgrass prairie. So it's a huge expanse of land that's covered in grasses. And now we are looking at about 4% of the tallgrass prairie remaining and about half of the shortgrass prairie remaining. So prairie land really is facing immense pressure. I mean, due to its relatively flat nature, it's easy to build on. It has amazing, incredible productive soils upon which many economies are dependent. And so it's been converted over. And so what remains is truly a rare landscape, which is why we are so passionate about protecting our prairies. So what is a prairie? Does anybody want to shout out just a general definition? I heard someone. A large, dry rainfall? Yeah, yep. So absolutely. You could say it's a relatively flat, maybe hilly expanse of land that's primarily dominated by grasslands and typically has, low rainfall. There are some prairies up in Northeast Texas that gets quite a bit of rain as well. So just large expansive land that's primarily dominated by grasses and then wildflowers. So pretty simple definition. Am I too loud? I've asked that question more than once in my life. Okay, so that's our general definition. Prairies are extremely special, like I said. I'm a 6th-generation Texan, so I grew up riding horses on these grasslands. Have any of y'all grown up on a grassland or own a grassland? Okay. I guess I expected a room full of, how many of y'all have driven by a grassland and thought, wow, that's beautiful? Gotcha. Okay. Well, these are our quintessential landscapes here in Texas, and they make Texas feel like home. Of course, they come with many other benefits, but to me, there's just nothing more quintessential than this gorgeous, wide open space. It screams Texas to me. So prairies are ancient. When you go out and see a remnant prairie, a true remnant prairie, an unaltered prairie, you're looking at something that's very, very old. You could say 8 to 10,000 years, but if you think about the rock formations present within the soil, you're talking millions of years really that it took to become the prairie that you see. So when you go out and see one, it's a really special thing. It's almost like going to a museum in a way. And something I'm not including in this presentation, but I should have, is a map of publicly accessible prairies. I can send that to you, Vicki, afterwards. There's plenty of publicly accessible prairies. And if you haven't spent time on one, highly recommend it because they kind of lack relevance when you haven't been out on one to see how special they are. You have to step foot on one and hear from an expert to kind of fall in love with them. This is Daphne Prairie. It's up in Northeast Texas. That's just a ton of liatris. Again, Northeast Texas, one of the most, I hadn't spent any time up there before my job with NPAT, and I mainly think, when I think of prairies, I think of Blackland and I think of post oak savanna, but I don't think of Northeast Texas. With that extra rainfall, they just have exceptionally dense prairie land. Anyways, yeah, Daphne Prairie up in Northeast Texas. I want to make sure I'm not going over on time. Not, all right, 8:03. We have till 8:45? Okay. So when I'm looking at a prairie land, I'm looking for some general traits. So I said it's a relatively flat expanse of land that's dominated primarily by grasses. So first thing I'm seeing, I'm looking for a high diversity mix of warm and cool season native grasses and forbs. So you have grasses and wildflowers growing, covering the soil, and blooming throughout the entire year, which creates this amazing intricate biodiversity of roots, active living roots underneath the soil throughout the entire year, which contributes to that amazing soil that I mentioned earlier. A lot of those plants are going to be your warm season perennials. So that's what you're going to see the most of in a prairie. And last is you're looking for most of the biomass to be in the roots. Prairies are, most of the prairie land that you see is happening underneath your feet. So 3/4 of the biomass of a prairie is in the soil, in the root system below the ground. So you see all of this amazing color above the ground, but there's even more going on beneath it, with soil sometimes going as low as 10 to 20 feet. So like I said, prairies are dominated by grasses. Does anybody want to guess how many species of grasses are native to Texas? Hundreds, yep. 570, a little over 570. So my next question is, who do you think in the US has the most species of grasses? Texas. Yeah, you bet your boots. We have the most species of grasses of any other state that are native to here, native to Texas. So, and you'll see hundreds of them on a single prairie. If you have a healthy prairie, you'll see hundreds of grass species. But just like you and I, when we go to the doctor, they have indicators of health and they have indicators of lack of health. So doctor's going to look at your blood pressure, doctor's going to look at your temperature, and they're going to say, you know what, we have this, this, and this present. That's a healthy person. Prairies are the same. So we look for indicator species, and a few that come to mind that are neat to talk about for those that are new to prairies are the big four. Has anybody heard of the big four? Okay. Well, does anybody want to say, does anybody know one of the big four or all four of them? I heard them all. Okay, I heard them all. I'm just gonna leave. My work is done. Yeah, so I heard them all. We have little blue stem. This is the rock star. It is ubiquitous across the state and even across the nation. I was just in Boise with my brother, and there was a ton of little blue stem up there and Indian grass. So you have, it's one of my favorite grasses. I'm going to say that about all the grasses I'm going to talk about, but one of my favorite grasses, little blue stem, sends up these gorgeous gray, green, blue shoots towards the springtime, and then gets bigger and bigger towards gold and green, and then in the fall it turns this gorgeous rusty red brown, and it's just stunning, and it sends out these flowers and then these grains that are kind of fluffy at the top. It's just a magical, magical grass. And again, it's ubiquitous. Yes. That's a good question. So the question was, why does Texas have so many grass species? I wonder, part of it is, yeah, the variety of our ecoregions. So we have such a vast amount of and spectrum of ecoregions from ultra dry West Texas to, like I said, like moist East Texas that gets tons and tons of rainfall. So because of that, you have just a wide variety of plants that are required to adapt in those areas. So part of it is our land mass. You know, we're 170 million acres, so a lot of room for a lot of different personalities to grow when it comes to plants? That's a good question. The next one, big blue stem. Again, one of my favorites. Similar to little blue, in late springtime, you start seeing these big blue, gray, blue, green shoots come up. And it can get up to, eventually it turns more green and it gets up to 5 to 7 feet tall sometimes. You might see it on the side of the road. This was a really good year for big blue stem. I'm from West Fort Worth and it was all over the place. Well, places where people weren't mowing. And I was just delighted to see it. And it has this pronged inflorescence at the top that sometimes looks like a turkey leg. So imagine a giant version of KR bluestem, but it's good. So that's another one of the big four. You have Indian grass as well. This is my actual favorite grass. Okay, I mean it. That it's the stunning grass, especially yeah, if you see it in person. Obviously, I like this gray, green, blue color. Again, giant, you know, these big fat blades shoot up that are just this gray, blue kind of sky color. And then towards summertime and fall time, it shoots out these golden yellow, gorgeous inflorescences and grains later. So these pictures don't do it justice. So that's why, again, I would invite those of you who haven't been to a prairie to come out and check it out. Indian grass, and last is switchgrass. This is it's commonly mistaken for Johnson grass. But switchgrass, it has a similar size and shape and height to Johnson grass, but it's a lot more delicate than your Johnson grass. Also, Johnson grass has this white blade that goes down the center of the leaf, which kind of helps the inflorescence, that flower, that red grain is also a lot bulkier than your delicate switchgrass flowers. So that is your fourth of the big four. So again, we're looking for these grasses. When I go out on a prairie and I'm determining its health, if I want to score it, I'm looking for these big four on a prairie. And I often find them, which is always very exciting. So these grasses, like I said, yeah, I love this display. And that is my reaction too. Wow. So has anybody been here? It's okay, it's in DC. So it's at the US Botanical Garden at DC. And it's remarkable. I just love this display. And I think one of my favorite parts is this is not a tall enough display. You see the roots are bunched up. Yeah. My hair's been that long before, so I know what. Yeah, and so you can just see, you know, yes, you have all of this beauty going on above the ground, but little do you know, there's feet and feet and feet of these intricate relationships between roots, fungi, bacteria, and all these other microorganisms that are creating the very structure that we stand on and we rely on for so many services to us and local wildlife. So you see these root systems, and you can kind of picture they're almost like an invitation to water. So we think about Texas. We have beautiful rivers and streams flowing through our state, and we have the headwaters for several rivers. So when we think about that, we're thinking of springs, and we're thinking of aquifers that feed those springs. And how else do our aquifers get charged except for this gorgeous soil that's soaking in the water? So these root systems, like I said, with their relationships with all the other microorganisms, form the very structure that allows water to work its way down deep into our soil, into our aquifers, and ultimately into our springs and rivers. So they're responsible for some truly essential services, and I'll talk more about those later. But you can see some of these grasses have roots 5, 6 feet, some of them down to 20 even. And I said that prairies are ancient. Some of the grass and plants present on a prairie can be really old too. I was out at a property a few weeks back, and there was this big stand of big blue, and the guide there said it was likely hundreds of years old, that stand of big blue. So it's just been there for a long, long time. So I've mentioned the big four. Those are some of the grasses we might look for. I heard some other, of course, there's plenty of other grass species that are great indicators. Those are just kind of high level big four. So we're also looking at some indicator forbs, herbs, wildflowers, if you will. So let me see, do I have my laser? I've got some plant nerds here. Don't look at the bottom, but what do we got here? What about that? All right. I love it. That's like Leatris, but very close. And prairie phlox. Yeah, I knew you guys would know these. I don't even know why I have labels. These are some great prairie indicator forbs. So when you go out on a property, you see those big four, you see some other Texas native grasses, and you see some of these, you're looking at a really healthy prairie. So that's, again, another part of the assessment of a prairie. Rattlesnake master in particular is one of those key indicator plants. You don't see it growing unless it's in this gorgeous, healthy soil that's very, very old. So rattlesnake master is a really neat plant. It's got this linear leaf structure, almost like a grass, the way that grass veins kind of go linear versus how leaves, they go out on a normal plant. So you never see it in cultivation like this, but it's just easier to see it, what it actually looks like on its own. This is the rattlesnake master. It can get 5-6 feet tall. I was out getting some seeds from one the other day, and I was right here getting some seeds. So it gets really tall. And it's a great plant. It's again, if you see it out in a prairie, you know you're looking at a healthy remnant prairie, or an extremely passionate prairie restoration enthusiast that's worked their butts off to get that soil, to get that rattlesnake master. So I've talked about this. Prairies have extremely high biodiversity and high biomass. So we know that 3/4 of what's going on in a prairie is living underneath our feet. So in 1 acre of native prairie, you can have sometimes over 300 native plant species. So when you're looking at a prairie on a smaller scale, you're talking about more biodiversity than even your tropical rainforest. So it's, again, extremely special place. And this biodiversity supports a host of local wildlife. Does anybody know what this is? Yeah, I'm here. It's an eastern spotted skunk. Did somebody say that? I thought I heard skunk. Okay. These guys get up on their front feet to spray, like when a chihuahua drinks water and their little back legs go up. It's a wild thing to do. But yeah, these systems support a host of local wildlife that we, cherish local wildlife. Here's some birds. Do we have some birders here? This is just, okay. There you go. Round of applause. I knocked the battery out. Too enthusiastic. Gotta calm down. All right. So again, these systems are host to a number of bird and wildlife species. You guys are enthusiasts and will know each and every one of them, but I only have time for those couple slides. And there's far more that are reliant on that system. Let me see if I can do this and talk at the same time. How many blondes does it take to? Okay. So I mentioned before that we are reliant upon prairies for the services that they provide. Yes, they are these cherished, amazing landscapes emotionally for many of us as Texans, but they also provide a lot of function and they sustain our way of life here in Texas. And the fancy word that I'm sure y'all have heard a lot of at this point for that term is ecosystem services. So what benefits, what services do prairies provide that maintains and sustains both our lives as local human residents and the local wildlife? And I've mentioned a couple. So we've talked about water infiltration. So they're huge when it comes to water quality and quantity. And there's several other aspects to consider. So we're talking air filtration, so air quality. We're talking food. We're talking the economy. So that soil that I mentioned is some of the richest, healthiest soil on the planet. And of course, we've developed an extremely successful economy based on that soil in the form of agriculture. So our food and our economy is highly reliant upon prairie systems. I don't know that I've mentioned pollinators yet. Y'all might like pollinators. I don't know. Maybe you do. Pollinators are highly dependent on prairies for their habitat, and we are highly dependent on those pollinators for what's the stat? 1 in every 3 bites of food that you eat. So you have this system that we are so extremely dependent upon, and I don't think that a lot of folks think of nature in this way. They think of conservation as kind of this hippy-dippy, who cares situation. Obviously, this room doesn't. But when you talk about ecosystem services, you start to see how vital these systems are. And I could go on and on. I haven't even talked about cultural, the importance to us as a local culture that wild spaces hold. So these ecosystem services are a good way to kind of bring the purpose of conservation, especially of prairies, to somebody that's not super familiar with it, might not care as much about it. So I've mentioned how amazing prairies are. I'll get into doom and gloom for just a little sliver, and then we'll get right back into some conservation and some stories of hope. So these prairies are under extreme pressure. So I mentioned before, in the United States and across Canada, you had that tall grass and short grass prairie, of which you have 4% of that tall grass remaining, and you have a little over half of that short grass prairie remaining in the country. So that's already pretty extreme. Then when you get down on a smaller picture, you look at our Blackland prairies, originally blanketed 12 million acres of our state. You're looking at thousands of acres now remaining that have been untouched. So it's harsh and it's a lot to think about, but there's a lot of organizations, including us, that are focused on preserving what remains. And more than that, there's people that are restoring prairie in an amazing way. So that acreage is starting to add up more and more. And it's just like, what is that, third encounters? Or if you build it, they will come. If you build a prairie, the animals and pollinators will come. And it's quite remarkable to see the kind of species recovery that happens when animals have habitat. So we all know, y'all are in McKinney, the population is crazy. We see a lot of it focused on DFW, Houston, and San Antonio, often referred to as this Texas triangle. So we're seeing a lot of population influx in the Texas triangle. What state do you think has the highest population increase? Number 1 growing state. You might think Texas. We're number 2. Florida. I'm pale. I don't get it. I don't know. I don't understand Florida. But we are the second fastest growing state in the country. And when you look a little bit closer at, we have some of the fastest growing counties in the country as well. So, and it's not stopping. People are coming here for our amazing economy, our warm climate. They're coming here for all the right reasons, and they want a little slice of heaven too. I get it. But as a result, we are seeing this extremely quick development and subdivision and conversion of our rural and open spaces. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here, so I don't want to get too far into this. But because of that, we are seeing quite a bit of conversion of prairie land. And so they're under immense pressures, which is why we're needing to be extremely mindful and urgent in their preservation. So this is what you're seeing a lot of: open spaces converted to subdivisions. I'd like to say I live in a home quite like that one right there, like that. This is where I live too. So I wanted to pause and say that we're by no means against development. We just want to advocate for the thoughtful preservation of the land that sustains our way of life in advance of this population. So we're still going to have more and more people coming in. How do we preserve important lands so that we can sustain all of them and our way of life? Again, so not necessarily against development, just pro mindful, thoughtful development. Is that a thing? Does anybody recognize that highway? I've never been to Houston. I don't know why. This is in Houston. I think it's 26 lanes, something like that. Wild. Makes us in DFW feel a little bit better. Maybe we have something like this. I don't know. Um, and so, like I said, this population influx brings quite a bit of pressure with it. So this is a shot from space of our light pollution. I'm sure y'all have heard about light pollution and what kind of a threat it poses to our migrating bird species that use the moon for navigation. It really alters their courses and can affect migration along with a host of other negative influences that I'm sure y'all know about. Again, this is NASA released some imagery of nitrogen dioxide, which comes from, the burning of fuels. So you can see a lot has been emitted over San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, which affects our air quality. This is just three graphics from this fantastic report out of the Texas A&M's Natural Resources Institute. If y'all are into land usage trends, I highly recommend going and checking this out. There's just far more information, but a few graphics of note. So we have on the far left here, the rate of working land conversion. So this is when you have open space or working open space that's been converted to subdivisions, businesses, et cetera. And so what you're seeing is, of course, kind of concentrated to that Texas triangle. We've had a little over 2 million acres of rural lands converted in the past 25 years. And likewise, on the far right, those two metrics are reflecting the change in population. So the population is growing now, not in Dallas or Tarrant County anymore, or Parker. It's growing in the counties directly outside of DFW. So it's kind of this urban sprawl effect. And that's in that top right. That's what those red counties are. And then in the bottom, you have an increase in sales price for property. So all of this together is showing a picture of, like I said, immense pressure both on the land and on us. I know I just bought a house and it was quite a step for my husband and I to take, and quite intimidating. So when we're talking about high prices for land, it's relevant to conservation because we're talking about high prices for land conservation as well. So it just adds kind of an extra obstacle. So, moving forward, we've got this issue. We have an influx of population. What's the solution? So now we're kind of getting into the good stuff, the land conservation. So how does land conservation work in Texas? So the first thought probably is public parks, public land. And this is a map of our publicly protected land in Texas. Yeah, do you need a microscope? So you've got federal, local, state parks here mapped. What percent do y'all want to guess is 1%? Okay, I'll be more generous. It's 3 to 4%. So we said Texas is 170 million acres. What's 3% of that? Like a little over 5 million acres is protected. So we're talking, especially when we're comparing to other states, Colorado is 43% publicly owned. Idaho is 70% publicly owned. Florida is 29%. So it's pretty rare for a state to be so privately owned. So that leads me to the next thing and where land trusts come in. So what about that 97, 96% of land that's privately owned? Well, that's private landowners here in Texas. And so when we're talking about land preservation and protection in Texas, we're talking conversations and partnerships with the private landowners here. They make a remarkable difference in the amount of land that's protected and will be the determining factor likely in the protection of Texas. Unless we start getting some more funding, which, did y'all hear about the Bicentennial Parks Fund? Okay, well, 2023, this was approved. It's a $1 billion fund that is going to be used by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to expand our parks. So they're just getting started on that. I know there's the Palo Pinto Mountain State Park going on out west. So there is some more funding coming in. It's just slow. 8:28, you said I have till 8:45? Okay. So like I said, when we're talking about the protection of Texas and prairie lands in Texas, we're talking conversations with landowners that care about their properties. And that's where land trusts like NPAT come in. So what is a land trust? So essentially it's a nonprofit that works to conserve land in the public interest through different transactions. And I'm going to try and go through this real quick. We're often nonprofits, sometimes we're government structures. This is a brief history of land conservation in the US and then in our state. Just some dates of note would be, you have your first city park in 1634. Then you have Central Park in 1857. And then you have your very first land trust in 1891 that's still active today. Of course, you have the Nature Conservancy. That's another land trust that starts up in 1951. And then you have the first land trust in Texas in 1964. At that point, you start to have conservation easements enabled. So conservation easements become a thing in the state of Texas in 1983. And then they're later given more and more benefits to where at this point, a conservation easement provides absolute permanent perpetual protection on a property. So I mentioned different types of land conservation. Land trusts work to preserve properties through all sorts of different agreements. So one of them is fairly simple. It's fee simple. So outright ownership. Like I said, we have 11 properties that we own outright. We acquired through fundraising, donations, et cetera. So some folks want to donate their properties to NPAT and we manage them as prairie lands. The second and most common option is, like I mentioned, a conservation easement. And a super high level definition of that would be a voluntary legal agreement that a private landowner establishes on their property to protect the land from subdivision and development in perpetuity. So it's a really powerful tool and it goes beyond their ownership and travels with the property. Second, acquired through purchase. Some counties will have some really great funding available for preservation of land. It just depends on where you're at. Down in the hill country, there's a lot of funding available for land preservation, some up here. And then conservation banking, which is kind of like carbon offsets, but for if you've developed on this property, then you go and buy X acres of wild space to accommodate and compensate for that. I'm going to skip through this. But there's dozens more land trusts in Texas. So there's 35 different land trusts that are all working with various missions, but they have one common goal, and that is to protect lands, most commonly through conservation easements and land acquisition. So these are some of the many amazing land trusts that are active in Texas. And together they pack quite a punch. So this is a map of conserved lands by land trusts, and it's right at about 2 million acres of protected lands. Again, this is mainly conversations with private landowners. So this is a map from the Texas Land Trust Council, which is kind of your backbone organization for those 35 land trusts across the state. So there's quite a bit of land conservation through easements. This is another map of conserved lands through land trusts based on counties. You see Blackland Prairie is missing quite a bit. So that's why we have kind of a focal region in the area. And then by ecoregion, you have a concentration of preservation going on Edwards Plateau, Gulf, and Trans-Pecos. So kind of a shortage in Fort Worth, Dallas, Cross Timbers, Blackland Prairies, Post Oak area, your prairies. So conservation easements have increased in popularity dramatically. Over 95% of these agreements have happened in the last 20 years. So this is kind of a chart showing how much the use of conservation easements has grown over time. I'm going to skip that. If anybody wants to know about what a conservation easement is, just come find me. We can get in the nitty gritty, but essentially it's an agreement that a landowner can enter to protect their property. Some misconceptions about easements. One of them is that you lose ownership of your property when you establish a conservation easement. That's not the case. You would retain ownership of the property. Another misconception is that when you have one, the public all of a sudden has access to your land. That's not the case at all. So again, if you're looking for options to preserve your property beyond your own ownership, just come find me. I'm happy to talk through options. Yeah. Limited subdivision typically means no subdivision. So that's the beauty of a conservation easement is your property's not going to be subdivided. I mean, maybe we'll allow one or two if you're looking at a huge property. Yes, maybe it could be divided once or twice, but oftentimes there is no subdivision allowed. So it provides this peace of mind for landowners who maybe they don't know what their kids will do with the property, or maybe they just want to know that it's going to be protected far beyond their ownership and travel with the land. Yeah, so no subdivision. So again, it provides some benefits. So landowner ultimately has this peace of mind knowing that the property that they've fallen in love with through, maybe they bought it themselves and have restored it themselves, is being protected beyond them. Maybe they've inherited that property. Maybe they grew up on that property. They've been ranching on it for generations after generations. And the way that the economy's been working, they don't know if they can ranch again and they want to protect the land. There's also some income tax benefits that come with that I won't get into tonight. So I mentioned conservation easements. So that's my primary role is I work with private landowners to establish conservation easements to protect their prairie land. And back in 2023, Native Prairies Association of Texas launched the North Texas Prairie Initiative, specifically focused on protecting prairie land in the North Texas region. I showed y'all maps of protected lands based with land trusts, and there's obviously a real shortage in the areas where there's prairie. We also have an immense amount of development here. So being aware of those two factors, we've launched this initiative. And that's actually where those 1,100 acres of recently protected land are concentrated to. So you can kind of see them. It's these little orange properties kind of scattered about the DFW area. Those are our conserved lands. So we're really excited about this project. And we're actually hosting a couple workshops this fall out at some really gorgeous prairie properties in case y'all are wanting to come out and join. I'll put some details up for that. So anyways, if you or anybody you know is sitting on some acreage and wanting to talk about options for protecting that land beyond your ownership of it, let me know. Favorite answer is it depends. So it really depends. Oftentimes we are working with over 100 or over 75 acres, though prairies are rare. And so if you're sitting on a few acres of remnant prairie, that's a discussion because it's precious and we want to protect that as well. So yeah. Yes. Oh, no. No, it's not like a Yosemite Sam kind of situation. No, we're not in competition. If anything, when folks are asking about easements, we say go shop around and talk to your different land trusts. They all have different missions, slightly different missions. We're prairie based, The Nature Conservancy goes for kind of widespread big projects that influence big areas. So it just depends what your mission is as a landowner. So no, not a competition. If anything, we've made some recommendations to others that were a better fit. Like there's a Texas Agricultural Land Trust that's obviously focused more on agricultural families and sometimes better suited to, folks that are in big livestock operations. So yeah, we're all friendly. We don't have any alleyway meetups. So I mentioned that we excitedly have preserved a little over 1,100 acres in the past year and a half. A couple of our most recent success stories would be Drake Ranch out in Somervell County. This is just 1.5 miles away from downtown Glen Rose, which is experiencing quite a bit of development. Actually, 300 yards away from this property is one of those big multi-home developments. So it could not have come at a better time. We just put a conservation easement on this property in partnership with the owners, the Drakes. So we're just delighted about that project. It's just a beautiful property, some great water features, beautiful grasslands. They've worked so hard to get some of the juniper cedar off of their property and seed with some native grasses. So it's a restoration project as well. Another project, 521 acres up in Hopkins County with the Abels. The Abels are another remarkable family that we're working with. They have done extraordinary work on their property up in Northeast Texas. They use livestock to regenerate their prairie lands, and it's pretty incredible to see what they've done with some rotational grazing. So those are two success stories that we're delighted about, and we're always looking to partner with more landowners. So if you know anyone, bring them our way. And of course, like I said, there's another name for it, for that savage cabbage, but we had to be politically correct. So I mentioned we're a membership organization. Just like y'all, we have an amazing group of volunteers across the state that are involved in a number of prairie restoration and field visits and projects across the state. So again, if you're looking to get more involved with prairie work, definitely check us out. That's just one of ours. We do a lot of kids education programs. And yeah, just a lot of really fun field activities. These are the two workshops going on this fall. These are both at very special private properties. This top one, November 1st, is on a special day for y'all, so nix it because it's your bison and something. Okay, we'll prioritize that. And for the ones of you left over, if you want to come to this. So yeah, that first one, November 1st at Daphne Prairie. This is a little over 1,000 acres of remnant prairie in Northeast Texas. And it is such a beautiful property and special place. It reminds me of what the pioneers or the Native Americans would have experienced back in its historical state. So what a prairie might look like back in the day. And likewise, November 14th, landowner workshop at Rakosa Ridge. This is a 6,000 acre property down in Bosque County. Both of these are private properties. You don't get a chance to go see them with some truly remarkable landowners and managers. So if you're looking to get out, kind of hands-on, check these out. We'd love to have you out. That is that big blue stem circle that I was talking about that was hundreds of years old, this here. It hadn't grown up yet. It was just the very beginning of it. But really neat. Okay, well, that's it. I think, yeah, 8:41. Does anybody have any questions?